Okay, welcome everyone to Aspetuck Land Trust Lunch and Learn series. My name is Jean Stets-Pachelski, and I'm the moderator for today's program. We're honored today to welcome our own Charlie Stebbins, a longtime Aspetuck Land Trust supporter, who will be speaking about his many years of work as a former board member and now steward in partnership with the Connecticut Audubon on sanctuaries and conservation. And today we'll be talking about the Smith Richardson Preserve in Westport. So before getting started, I'd like to share just some quick tips on how we're utilizing Zoom today that will allow us to have a seamless webinar experience. So for the people who are familiar with Zoom and people who are not, you know that you can come right down to the bottom. This is a webinar, so that we will be using the chat and the Q&A feature. So if you take that cursor and run your cursor right along the bottom, you'll see the chat and Q&A. We will be utilizing those features. We're a webinar, so we can't see you, but we will be monitoring the chat throughout the program so we can curate all of your questions that you'll have for Charlie and attend to those right at the end of his presentation. So we just invite you to engage via chat and Q&A today. So before getting started, I'd like to introduce Mary Ellen LeMay, who's on screen with us. She's the Director of Landowner Engagement at Aspetuck Land Trust, and she'll be kicking off a video, a 3-minute video that explains the Aspetuck Land Trust Green Corridor Initiative. And while you watch the video, keep in mind how everything you do in your yard has an impact on the broader connected landscape. So welcome everyone, and over to you, Mel.
Okay. Imagine a Fairfield County where the beauty of our land is preserved, where birds and insects flourish and natural species thrive, where people have more preserved lands to enjoy, drinking water is pure, and flooding is diminished. Here at Aspetuck Land Trust, we are making this happen and encouraging others to support our Green Corridor mission. Part 1 of the Green Corridor is protecting land. We are preserving strategically located land parcels in our 6-town region by either purchasing them or receiving them as donations. So far, this includes 42 parcels and over 800 acres of land. Among those are Gilberti's Farm and the Fromson Strassler property in Weston, where we are creating a 705-acre forest block on the Weston-Wilton border. Part 2 of the Green Corridor is land stewardship, encouraging homeowners to keep their backyards sustainable.
We are controlling the plants that are on our land. And right now we vastly favor giant lawns. We've got 40 million acres of lawn in this country. That's the size of New England. And particularly the way we treat our lawns, it's a deadscape. Our lawns don't provide food webs that support all the other things that we need. So what we want to do is re-landscape our yards. I suggest we cut the area of lawn in half, put in the plants that support the food webs and the pollinators, and create what we call biological corridors that connect the actual habitats so that the plants and animals in those habitats not only can move back and forth between habitats, but they can actually live outside those habitats. Now, the Green Corridor Initiative from Aspetuck Land Trust is organizing an effort to create the biological corridors that we talked about. Of course, the corridor will be much more effective if everybody joins up. If you have holes in it, that's an obstruction. And it's not hard. Put that oak tree in your yard and instead of the ginkgo, and all of a sudden you've got connectivity with migrating birds and countless other species.
We are in a critical moment in time to save our species and protect our natural lands. Insect populations have declined by 40% since the 1970s, and we've lost 3 billion birds since that time. And as population growth swells in America's suburbs, so does harmful development. Creating a greener planet starts with greener suburbs and greener backyards.
Well,
Well, hello, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that. And we got a few more folks coming on board while we were watching the video. I'm very excited today to introduce our next Lunch and Learn speaker. Charlie Stebbins, if you don't know him, is a great friend of the Aspetuck Land Trust and also of Connecticut Audubon. And just to give you a little bit of background on Charlie, he has divided up his life experience in 3 categories, which I just love. It's learn, earn, and return. So I can share with you the 3 categories for Charlie. So it gives you a perspective on what he's done in his life. Charlie graduated both from Yale University and from UPenn Wharton. His earn stage was working as managing director at JP Morgan, and as well as Booz Allen Hamilton Consultants. And Charlie retired in 2018, I think, and now serves on the board of the New York and Connecticut Heart Association, serves on the board of the Connecticut Audubon Society for 7 years, and is now a partner steward on the Audubon Sanctuary and Conservation and Finance committees. He currently also serves on 2 boards for the Oak Lawn Cemetery, where he has worked with Jed DeGood from Oliver's Nursery and Charlie's son Hayden putting in pollinator gardens. He also serves on the Memorial Garden Committee for the Greenfield Hill Congregational Church in Fairfield, and is the founder and designer of their 2-acre garden with Oliver's, which is celebrating its 25th anniversary this year. And Charlie, which I didn't even realize, I know he's been very involved with the Aspetuck Land Trust. He is also the founding and funding member of the Land Trust's Trout Brook Sanctuary that was dedicated and preserved in the mid-1990s. As Charlie says, this was his gateway drug to land conservation in Connecticut. So Charlie's work at the Connecticut Audubon Society has been quite incredible, and he's turned into my go-to guy for questions I have about birds. I just, look to Charlie as a model for what so many of us can do in our lives. In the 3rd stage, we can return all of our expertise to doing good and returning to the community and protecting birds and increasing biodiversity. So I'm delighted to have Charlie here today to share his experiences at the Smith-Richardson Preserve, which, if you haven't been there, I highly encourage you to see how beautiful this sanctuary is. And it wasn't always like that. And it's inspiring to see the work that was done and how nature has returned there. And it gives us hope that if we do the same thing in our backyards, nature will visit us there too. So without any further ado, I'd love to introduce Charlie Stebbins and have him begin his presentation. Charlie, if you're able to share your screen, you can begin now. If you're not able to, I can show the presentation for you and forward it. You just would have to tell me to forward it for you. Oh, he got it. Excellent. Okay, and let's see, then if you go to presenters, if you go to.
How's that?
Perfect. That's perfect. Great, Charlie, and we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay.
So thank you. Thanks, Charlie. Okay.
Well, I've been told I have a radio voice, so hopefully you can hear that clear enough, Mel.
Yep, it's coming in loud and clear, just perfect. Thanks, Charlie.
Well, that was quite a flattering intro. It's great to be retired because now I get to do what I want to do after 35 years at JP Morgan, it's nice to have the opportunity to partner up with not just the Audubon, but with David and Mary Ellen and the Aspetuck Land Trust team. Back in the day, I knew Bruce LePage, who was critical in getting that Trout Brook property preserved. And I grew up in New Canaan, and the corporations and the developers always got the win when it came to land development. And to see that it doesn't always work out that way, that the good guys can sometimes come in first, that was so inspiring. And we've had so many great success stories. And this is one that I'm really excited to share. Just for those of you who don't know where the Smith-Richardson Wildlife Preserve is located, it's right across the street from the Southport Beach, which is the dividing line between Southport and Greens Farms being Westport, Southport being part of Fairfield. If you go past the beach and start going north away from Long Island Sound, on the left-hand side, at the corner of Headley Farms Road and Sasco Creek, you'll see the kiosk and the parking lot. Just pull right in there and start your visit. And on the opposite side of this 35 acres, which is one of 3 parcels, is the Green Farms Academy School. We share a lot of common space with them, and they're great partners. So this says 74 acres. It actually is broken into 3 different plots. The lower plot that I just described is 36 acres, and that's what we're going to spend our time on. So what was Smith-Richardson in 2013? It was basically a mess. It was donated to us by the Richardson family, a very successful, I guess, legacy, because there were many generations of Richardsons, but H. Smith-Richardson focused on the old Vicks Vapor Rub, Richardson Vicks, and made a lot of money, and gave not only this land, but gave land for the golf course up in Fairfield called the Smith-Richardson Golf Course, and many other open spaces. But the problem was there was no money that came along with that gift. And if that sounds greedy, I suppose it is a little bit, except that it takes a lot of money to keep these properties in shape. And there was no money, there was no attention, there was no vision. And the 75 acres, so now I include the 2 other parcels of Smith-Richardson, were just in terrible disrepair. And that all started to change in 2013 with Jared O'Connell, whom I hope is on this call, as he was a neighbor who took the time to contact the Audubon and say, come on, guys, you have 75 acres in some of the toniest, wealthiest land in all of Connecticut, including Greenwich. There's Billionaires Row that runs along Beachside, and you're just not paying attention. Rodney Dangerfield, Robert Mitchum used to live there. They left for their own reasons, but the owls were leaving, which was one of Jared's favorite birds, as the habitat was collapsing and the vines were choking and everything was in a mess. So where's Audubon? Jared asked. Let's get this thing turned around. Here's what we were facing. It's 2013. This is before the restorations. It's something out of The Wizard of Oz and the Haunted Forest. Those are blankets of mile a minute and porcelain berry and bittersweet year after year, just piling on top of itself and killing the trees and suffocating any native that dared to show its head. Here's a path, one of the few that you could actually get through at that point, but again, looking like something out of the Haunted Forest. And the wetlands were just gagged. You might see a few jack in the pulpit popping out, maybe a few ferns, but really nothing else. And it was really a place that people didn't visit anymore. I mean, here it was in this beautiful part of Westport, and virtually nobody bothered to take the time to visit because there was really nothing to see, and it was very sad. And here's what we were facing. This is a cross section of the invasives that's working from the bottom up. Many of these you know, some of them you may not know. At the ground level, we have featuring mugwort, Canada thistle, garlic mustard, Japanese stiltgrass, Japanese barberry. Just so aggressive and so noxious. You move up to the mid-story level, you have buckthorn, Japanese honeysuckle, autumn olive, and Connecticut's favorite, the burning bush or winged euonymus. It's everywhere. It looks beautiful in the fall with its pink, but it is not friendly to natives that want to share the property. And at the canopy level, you have porcelain berry, oriental bittersweet, all very beautiful, and you'd understand why the nurseries were hawking these things and selling them aggressively back before we got religion. But they have basically taken over. And my favorite, or my least favorite, is mile a minute, sometimes referred to as Asiatic tear thumb. And if you ever try to pull it out, you'll know exactly why it's called tear thumb. But the amazing thing about myelominate is it's an annual. It dies all the way back in the winter, and then it regenerates and grows up to 6 inches a day in its peak growing season of August, September, and October. So it looks like it's gone, and then all of a sudden you turn around and it's covering the landscape. And of course, the deer. What can we have a gardening conversation without talking about the deer? And it's a particular problem in Westport because there is a hunting ordinance where they do not allow any hunting at all of birds, deer or otherwise. That's an ordinance that dates way, way back, and it's the only town actually in all of Connecticut where they don't even allow a call of deer. And that's a problem because the deer, in addition to the invasives, have eaten all the understory, all the native plants. There's a few rare exceptions, but that is a challenge that is equally daunting as fighting back the invasives. So let's take a step back just quickly on the Connecticut Audubon Society. It has an impressive portfolio of properties, 3,200 acres and growing. The latest gift was actually from the Riston family of Citibank fame up in Sherman, Connecticut. It's 830 acres, you can imagine, not only in Sherman, but going over the New York border into Pauling, New York. And it's a beautiful property, 830 acres. The nice thing about that is it also came with $18 million. You can do a lot of maintenance. You can do a lot of repair for $18 million. Harken back to Smith Richardson, there was no money, no endowment. And yet we have as diverse a habitat as any of these 20 sanctuaries. We have hardwood forests, we have pollinator meadows, we have freshwater ponds and vernal pools, and we have a brackish estuary that feeds into that Sasko River. And each one of these habitats needs a different formula for restoration and success, different approaches to planting and care, and yet with no money to play with, how do you get started? So we took a step back. Jared and I had partnered up. I was introduced to him shortly after that letter, and it was really a marriage made in heaven. I mean, we really do see the world in very much the same way, and are both zealots when it comes to projects. And Jared runs a printing company in New York. I am a retired banker of 35 years, no particular background in biology or civiculture or anything like that, just a passion and a willingness to lead and put in time. So we said, okay, where do we start? Well, we've got to start getting these invasives out of here, and we got to build some momentum, get a little bit of visibility, and get some people to team up with us. So we created something called the Friends of Smith. You see Friends of monikers all over the place. Friends of Sherwood Island, Friends of Deer Pond. This is something that I think is a really powerful tool, bringing together volunteers and not asking them for money right out of the box. Eventually you might, but just getting that core is so critical. And they have their connections as well. And that helps us to establish partnerships with corporations, NGOs, educational and regional groups, educational being some of the local schools who are some of the best providers of talent and muscle. Greens Farms Academy being right over the border, but also Staples and some of the schools in Fairfield all pitched in to help out. And I say regional in terms of the town of Fairfield and the town of Westport. We're all big supporters of what we're trying to do. And we knew eventually we'd have to raise some money. We try to get some grants, but right now it was just creating a core and getting the members and the friends of lined up. And let's just get some points on the board. Let's show some tangible results. Let's take a little space and plant some native plants so people can see the beauty and the color, even if it's a 30 by 20 square cut out of a choked up field, which is actually what we did on Earth Day 2014. And let's just get the momentum started. So let me tell you the story of how the Smith Richardson success unfolded. You saw the choked vines and suffocation. Well, this is the first Earth Day, volunteer day. This is 2014 in the spring, and we just started hacking, and we call it affectionately triage. because many of the trees weren't worth saving or weren't native, so we didn't want to save them. But the ones that were natives, the way we decided which to keep and which to get rid of was a rule of thumb. If you have a third of the greenery still on the tree, you can keep it. If it's less than a third, just cut it, put it on the pile, and let nature create a little shelter for the birds and the rabbits and the mice and all that. As it turned out, it was we called these piles rabbitats. And we didn't really know how ironic that would become, because the rabbits fell in love with these hutches, these man-made hutches, and now we have a bunny problem with an overpopulation of voracious bunnies eating so many of our new plants. But that's how you live and learn, and we've come up with ways to try to ameliorate that damage. I'm fast forwarding a little bit. This is actually the fifth volunteer day, the fifth Earth Day, and we'd come a long way from that first shot just one slide ago. And what I want to focus on here is the great partnerships that we had developed over those 5 years. I already mentioned Staples, and I mentioned Greens Farms Academy. All the way to the right, Wildlife in Crisis. Dara and Peter Reed run an incredible animal rehab center, and they were great supporters. Dugal is the print company that Jared works for, and JP Morgan is in there pitching in with some money and some volunteers as well. And the two nurseries, Oliver Nursery and Native Nurseries, great partners, not just providing great plant material, but also providing incredible expertise and support. And my favorite is really the Builders Beyond Borders. This is a great organization where the kids, most of them from Westport and West Dunn, pull together, have to do community work to qualify to go overseas and do more community work at places like Haiti, Nicaragua, and beyond. And these kids put in such hard time and such hard labor to earn the right to go and help others. And I can't say enough about B3. So here they are. Here are the volunteers. This is again, this is the 2018 crew. We'd grown from 35 volunteers back in 2014, where we were crawling over those noxious vines a few slides ago, and now we're up to 100 volunteers, all ready to go. I love this slide because it juxtaposes a slob, a Staples League of Boys volunteer in the upper left-hand corner, leaning into a shovel to plant a spruce tree. And then look at that little 6-year-old in the lower right, a future slob, leaning into his shovel to get that spruce planted and off to the races. Children of all ages. It was great. Neighbors and kids and corporate friends. It was every volunteer day was just an exercise in excellence. And just to say thank you, we would host a lunch delivered by the local food truck. This one happens to be Mexican tamale day. I think the year before we had the grilled cheese truck, which was a huge success, but hugely expensive. And that expense was borne by the man with his back to you with the white hair. That's my partner, Jared O'Connell. And he would pay for the truck and the beverages to keep everybody hydrated out in the field. And he also designed that sign that you saw, the banner a few slides back. And he would buy the lop shears and the tools and equipment, shovels to make the kids productive. And it was amazing how many kids would just show up with their parents' trowel and think that they were going to be planting a spruce tree with a trowel. But the kids didn't just need food to be incented. They just loved being out there doing good work and partnering up with their friends. And there is Jared, now his face to the camera on the left. He calls Volunteer Day his favorite day of the year. He's with this wonderful trio of ladies from the Builders Beyond Border team. I think they've got that's a chestnut oak there, and there's a red oak on the right with another team, very satisfied with a fair day's work. And it's not just the volunteer days. We would hold throughout the year various events, bird banding events, bird releases. That's upper left with the Wildlife in Crisis team I mentioned before. Just bird walks with Miley Bull, the head of conservation and sanctuary work at the Audubon, leading walks so people can really enjoy and identify all those beautiful visitors. And that's Miley in the lower left-hand corner with me. Just a word on this little project. The Southport Globe onion was the Dutch tulip bulb of the day. Very sought after, very delicious. And it made a lot of people very wealthy down in Greens Farms and Southport. It was that export of the Southport Globe onion that created that wealth. And unfortunately, a plague came in and pretty much wiped out the whole industry, and the gravy train was over. But our friend Sephra Alexandra, you might know her, she's the seed huntress. She has some heirloom seeds, and so does the Fairfield Historical Museum. And between those various sources, she planted up both the white and the red onion, and this is the harvest that came as a result. One last event that I'll talk about, native plant sales. Now, I know that these have become very popular. The native plant sale for Aspetuck Land Trust at the Haskins Preserve was a huge success. And kudos to Mel for driving that one. But this was our first, and it was hosted at Oliver Nursery on Earth Day 2017. And you can see it's not just about selling plants. People would buy these plants and then they donate them to the sanctuary. But look at all that literature. It's really educating the people on why you should be planting natives, why you should care about the kind of plant you're putting into your garden or into your onto your property or into your woodlands. So let me just take a quick sidelight to explain that. What is the benefit of the benefit of the natives over the non-natives? It really, I break it down simply to three parts. You have the pollinator and nectar sources. Those are generally the early season sources. That's a pussy willow, one of the first sources of pollen in the early spring. They're actually blooming right now out at the preserve. And then there's a bee balm and monarda, and then there's a what is that? A bottlebrush buckeye, which is more of a summer plant, but pollen being provided throughout the growing season. And then during the middle of the season, that foliage is so critical. The leaves and the stalks critical for caterpillars. And in this case, you can see that's the classic monarch caterpillar eating on a milkweed leaf. And they're the monarchs that then stage and move on to Mexico on some wing stem. And then the third component is, do these plants provide fruit, nuts, and berries? Most important for the migrants as they're coming through, recharging their motor and moving on south, some as far as Argentina in the case of the barn swallow. And we have here winterberry, and at the bottom, the beautiful blueberries, juniper berries of the cedar. And in the middle, one of my favorites, that's a persimmon. And that was a bare root planting a few years ago, and now it's actually bearing fruit. It's amazing. But again, does that explain why natives and not non-natives? The missing link here for non-natives is that middle tasty foliage space. The native insects and bugs can't feed on foreign sources, foreign foliage like the forsythia or some of the viburnum or pachysandra or these sorts of things. They just didn't evolve with those food sources. So without the bugs, unfortunately, then there's no food for the nestlings who are being born during that growing season. And so you have a collapse in the food cycle and a collapse in the breeding cycle. And the nestlings can't eat nuts and seeds. They need that soft food. And for instance, a Carolina chickadee feeds its brood over 9,000 caterpillars in the course of one breeding season. So you need that bridge. You need all three of these to have a successful habitat for all the levels of the pollinators in the bird population. And if you want to learn more, said much more elegantly than I just did, read Ptolemy's Bringing Nature Home. It even has an intro or forward by Rick Dark, who spoke to this group a week and a half ago. It's a great book. It gives the hierarchy of which trees are most beneficial for attracting natives. In the little video ahead of time, Doug gave a shout out to an oak over a ginkgo. The oak is the king of all native trees for supporting over 500 different pollinators, butterflies, bugs, quickly followed by the cherry tree, birch, and you can go on down the list there. It's a great reference guide, and again, a great read too. The second one I'd recommend, particularly if you're looking at taking your lawn, part of that green desert that I think Doug described, turn it into a butterfly garden, not maybe the whole thing, but a part of it, or let it rewild and become a pollinator pathway, an augmented field. And Larry shows you how to do it. He is very, very easy to follow. And he also conducts 2-day workshops, which I'd highly recommend. And you'll be working with professionals who want to hear Larry's opinion, but also beginner gardeners. And there's so many other sources. We could go on and on with the library of good books to read, but these are just a handful. And so back to the native plant sale. There's Jared again, happy to be surrounded by all these plants that are heading into the Smith Richardson. We raised $40,000 for this particular effort, but most importantly, we enlisted 60 new converts to the native plant ethos, if you will. And with all that literature that we were handing out, it really made for a very satisfying day. But the big breakthrough, and this is really the watershed moment, came in Thanksgiving of 2017 when we won a National Fish and Wildlife grant for $250,000. Now, up to that point, we'd been sort of scrimping and scraping volunteers and a little extra money. But with this $250,000 grant, it just allowed us to go big and change the whole conversation. The grant didn't actually go into effect until January 2018. So I mentioned the November 2017 is just when it was announced, but it was time to really step it up. Now, we'd won grants before, but the $250,000 grant, the 150 from NIFWIF with 100 to be matched by the Audubon, was the largest federal grant that the Audubon in its 125-year history had ever received. This is a plaque of a grant for the Cheney or Montville Center. Nice, very exciting to have all these partners again listed along the bottom, but we'd never had anything like the National Fish and Wildlife win. And that was a part of the Long Island Sound Futures Fund, where they were focusing on enhancing the coastal forest of Connecticut and Long Island and improving the waterways that feed into the Long Island Sound. And so we were so excited. We said, okay, let's the minute the bell rings, and that's January 1st, 2018, let's get to it. Unfortunately, we picked the probably one of the coldest Januaries that I can ever remember. And you remember the phrase polar vortex. Well, that was right on top of us. And we had to use Bic lighters to keep the fuel lines flowing because they kept gumming up because it was so cold. But here you see the chippers at work, the grappling jaws on the John Deere there, moving these logs and debris and creating those habitats and clearing up for the sowing of the seeds in the spring. And this is April of that year, 2018, with the All Habitat team run by David Roach. You may know that name. Very sophisticated piece of equipment called an injection seeder. It actually separates out the various types of wildflowers and grasses. They're very different textures, very different sizes, but it gives a smooth, even distribution. And I wish I could afford one, but there's something like $60,000. But we got 6 acres seeded thanks to the All Habitat crew. We're also able to have plenty of money now to buy good-sized trees, not just the little boys that we had been buying at Oliver's, for instance, but now bring on the trucks. And I need to give a special shout out on the left-hand side there, if you can see, it says Native Nursery, and underneath is Patrick Cummins, who is the executive director of the Connecticut Audubon Society. And he had just been selected to take over that role less than 6 months before, having worked at National Audubon for some time. But because of his reputation and his sterling knowledge, he knew the folks who were on the decision committee of the NIFWIF team, and I know we wouldn't have gotten this grant if it weren't for Patrick's reputation. So he is really the godfather of this success. And if we move forward on the right-hand side, those are an awful lot of holly trees. Let me tell you, those hollies will have a special place at Smith Richardson. They are deer resistant, unlike many of the blue holly that so many of the listeners probably have in and around their property. Those blue holly are Chinese and Japanese, and the deer actually love those. They don't touch these American holly. These are alpaca holly. And why do we love them, besides the fact that the deer don't eat them? Not only do they throw up a lot of red berries that are wonderful winter food, in particular for the cardinals and the cedar waxwings, but when they grow together and they mature, they create an incredible haven for owls. And if you want to see what a mature holly grove looks like, go down to Todd Point in Greenwich. It's just over the Stamford border, and it's just south of the 95. And there's a grove that was planted in 1957, 65 years ago. And I remember that because I was born in 1957. So the math is easy. And these beautiful hollies are all woven together, and you can't go down there without running into a saw-whet owl or a long-eared owl, or the biggest of the big, the great horned owls. And that's what we're looking for. I might not be around in 65 years when these trees turn into a comparable grove like Todd's Point, but as they say, you plant for your grandchildren, and that's what we're doing. And I have to give a shout out to Jed Duguid at Oliver's and his owner partner, Scott Jameson, so generous, not only providing great looking trees like this Eastern Red Cedar, but providing invaluable expertise and information, and giving us guidance throughout this whole planting process, particularly important during that 2018 NIFWIF grant. And last shout out, Nick Niles of Sasco Landscaping. He was the one on the tractor in that polar vortex picture, just tireless, really can do, always upbeat. Here he's just helping us unload and relocate these white spruce, but he and his partner in crime, Osvaldo, were just invaluable colleagues as we reforested the Smith Richardson Preserve. And so let me just take a moment and do a quick recap here, because I think this is pretty amazing. Since 2017 through the end of last year, we planted over 3,100 native trees and shrubs, 3,100 trees and shrubs. That's incredible, right? And that included 13 varieties of oaks. And you probably know about white oak. And this is a nice red oak that Oliver's actually donated to us. It's a 40-foot tree, by the way. And 13 of those oaks. So do you know what a chinkapin oak is? Do you know what a burr oak is? Well, these are all wonderful oaks with slightly different attributions, and they all help to attract pollinators, all part of that pollinator magnet where 500 plus species of butterflies and moths are supported. And that's why we love the oaks. That's why we love Talamay, because he tells the story over and over again. His latest book is only about oaks. And I love that he's a part of the Aspetuck Land Trust family, that he puts out the Talamay tidbits. I always learn something new when I tune into a Talamay moment. And remember those seeds that we were sowing? Well, here's what they look like 6 months later. That's a blue lobelia and royal catchfly. Love these, as do the hummingbirds. Blue vervain over to the right there, mixed in with the yarrow. And when you combine these, this is a swamp milkweed with that beautiful blue vervain. This merits a spot in anybody's garden. And oh, by the way, it also has the bonus of being native and supporting the pollinator population, in addition to adding great beauty to your floral display. And it's not just about the flowers. Here you have your little collection of critters, the painted turtle, the most common turtle in Connecticut and very common around the sanctuary, but also we guess about a 35-year-old mama snapping turtle looking for a place to lay her eggs. She's like clockwork, coming out and walking across some of our paths, scaring some of our visitors, but all she wants to do is find a place to extend her generation. And then she goes back to the pond. And then there's a little camera shy mouse that we found in somebody's abandoned shoe. But of course, we are the Audubon, and the birds are paramount. So what do we have showing up? There's an eastern towhee, lower left, upper left. That's an American goldfinch, red-tailed hawk going across the top, and some beautiful cedar waxwings perched up in shadblow. Over the years, we've had logged over 180 different species of birds in Smith-Richardson. We know that because there's something called eBird, which is a citizen science app run by Cornell's Lab of Ornithology. And so you can look back on what birds, where, when, how many, and the roster is pretty exciting for Smith-Richardson. Many of those birds, by the way, are migrating through. They're not there during the whole season, but 180 birds by any count is impressive. The shout out bird on this page is probably the most bland, I suppose. Little brown jobs is what they call the little sparrows, but this is a special sparrow. It's a LeConte sparrow, and I've only seen it twice, and that was down in Arkansas. To have one visit in Connecticut is real front page news. And with that eBird alert, we suddenly had an overflow of birders and photographers visiting the sanctuary. License plates from Rhode Island and Massachusetts. Birders are crazy for checking the box. And this little guy, almost like Old Faithful, every 20 minutes he would pop up out of the grasses, do a little show, let everybody take a picture, and then pop back down in the grasses. It was great. About 2 weeks worth of that display in the middle of October, a LeConte sparrow. And this isn't by accident that we attract these type birds. We, in the spring, plant sorghum and millet to try to provide good grain, good healthy food, especially for those migrants as they're working their way south for the winter. And a lot of these grasses don't really ripen and mature until the late summer and fall. So it very much is focused on those migrating birds. And speaking of migration, I couldn't help but put a picture of the monarch migrants who are dancing around this stand of swamp milkweed, marketed as rose milkweed, since swamp milkweed doesn't sound all that attractive. But also in the background, and we have tons of this, white snakeroot is a great pollinator source for the monarchs. And this is the last generation. There are 4 generations in the whole cycle of the monarch butterfly, and that last and 4th generation goes all the way down to Mexico, and so they need as much support and food as they possibly can get. And I'll just say that 2 years ago we counted 800 in a single day staging in this very space, right on the edge of the Greens Farms Academy ball fields and the sanctuary. And so where are all those sparrows hiding? Well, there are a lot, and this is a sunrise in what we call sparrow dice, because we have counted so many sparrows, and there are hundreds that are probably in this picture, but you can't see them yet. I think it was Patrick Cummings who coined the phrase sparrow dice. And here's an example of some of those sparrows, and it doesn't even include the LeContes. And Mel asked me to name them since she was interested in particularly that guy in the upper left. And so starting from the lower left, that's a Lincoln sparrow. That's a white crowned sparrow in the upper left. That's a beautiful picture of a song sparrow with an unmistakable call in the middle. And that's a Vesper sparrow upper right. That's also a pretty rare bird to find. And then the field sparrow on the lower right, which is protected and endangered in Connecticut, or at least its numbers are dropping rapidly. They seem to love Smith-Richardson, and we have several nice flocks that stay there through the winter. And that doesn't even include sparrows like the fox sparrow and the white-throated sparrow and the grasshopper sparrow and the lark sparrow. They're not just little brown jobs. They're all magnificent in their own right. And so I'd like to say plant it and they will come. It's not a problem. Clearing and planting is enough, but it's not enough. The deer make it that much more challenging for us, as I said before. We have to put up miles and miles of fencing and enclosures to protect our new plantings against the deer. And these are 8-foot tall metal posts with nylon netting, and the deer somehow find their way through these nettings all the time. I think of the velociraptors in that scene, in the kitchen scene in Jurassic Park, where they're just always poking and always trying to get into a locked room. These plastic tubes are to protect the trunks and the branches of young trees that we put in, and you can see we put in a lot. But it's not just the browse, the eating from the deer, as I mentioned before, the rabbits, and also meadow mice and other gnawing chewers in the winter, but the rut. Now, the rut is a very specific time of year. It runs from the middle of October to the middle of December, and it's when the male deer, otherwise known as stags, have to rub the velvet off their antlers in order to get their mating juices flowing and sharpen up in case they need to have a little joust with a rival. And unfortunately, that rutting is so destructive to trees and plants alike. I can't tell you how often I've come into the sanctuary on a beautiful morning just to see, say, a stand of northern bayberry just completely decimated in a pile of sticks because a deer was rubbing his antlers, getting ready for the rut. And these are big animals. These are 250 to 300 pound animals. We've seen 9 pointers in the sanctuary. So the rut is a big concern in addition to the year-round eating habits. And so people ask, well, at some point, right, you can get these trees liberated. You can open up the fences and they've grown enough so that they can be more natural part of the landscape. But the sad truth is that that isn't the way it works. The deer will come in and they'll eat a tree to that browse line 7 feet up in a matter of days. They will continue the rutting habits and destroy young trees. And I consider young trees anything 15 years and younger. And most of these trees are in their 4th, 5th, 6th year of growth. So I think it's just a sad reality that we have to be ever vigilant and protect them behind fencing. The tubes are a little bit different. We can put in less obnoxious looking tubes, just sort of woven sleeves. But at this stage, we go with the tall 6-footers, and you can see them in the background there. Okay, so to wrap up the NIFWIF story, the Long Island Sound Futures Fund story, we were required to put in 12 educational signs. This is one of those signs that talks about the history of the land, the history of the Greens Farms property here, Smith Richardson. Goes all the way back to the Indians, the indigenous people, and what great stewards they were of the property. It has a picture there of actually a cultivated field of Southport globe onions and a little bit of the history of the Southport globe onions. Talks about H. Smith Richardson himself and how he made his fortune in Vicks Vapor Rub and Vicks cough drops. Even talks about I-95 and its impact as it came roaring through and was built right on the edge of Smith Richardson in the 1950s. And there's a nice little map, gives you the stations of the cross and where you are so you don't get lost. We put in 12 of these, as I said. I want to give a shout out to Laura Tedeschi. She was the designer and a great consultant and partner on this. And there's nothing more gratifying for me than seeing a class of students, often from the neighboring Greens Farms Academy, reading these signs and smiling and enjoying a true outdoor classroom and learning something. It's a real bonus to have these signs out there. So quick recap on the Smith Richardson success, and we're getting toward the end of the presentation. Hopefully I haven't been taking too much time. 200 supporting members now, up from those original 40 or so. We planted the 3,100 native trees, 380 being oak. That pollinator garden, we put in 6,000 plugs. My son Hayden actually was the nurseryman growing 16,000 native plugs up in his farm up in Ithaca and Cornell that year, 2018. The interesting part about that exhibition garden is we have some behind deer fencing and some out in the open, and you can see as a gardener which ones are doing fine exposed to the deer and which ones you'd better cover up and protect. Things like the coneflowers and various sunflowers, and even the lobelia can be chewy for them. But my favorite landmark here was breaking the $1 million mark at Christmas, year-end appeal. between grants and donor donations and the like, as well as in-kind donations, we broke $1 million in contributions, and that's just stunning. So where do we go from here? One of the biggest concerns that we have is, are we getting it right? But we basically call it, I think Miley came up with this phrase, adaptive management. You don't know what nature is going to deal you, but you do the best you can to anticipate. And I look at what we've learned and how we lay it out in terms of our stewardship of Smith Richardson in 3 categories. There's the annual maintenance plans, which is not only the weekly mowing, weeding, and fence repair that runs about 30 grand a year, and every Monday we have a crew out there, but also, how best to attack that stilt grass, the mugwort, the porcelain berry. So annual plans, timing, and how to. Friends of Smith, I'll jump over this, but we are always looking to bring on new partners and additional engagement. And one of the most exciting new partners, and this is actually on the next page, is the collaboration that we're building with the Aspetuck Land Trust and Pollinator Pathway. And at the bottom there, always looking for new fundraising strategies. I'll just mention we won our second $250,000 grant with the Long Island Sound Futures Fund, but that's not going to focus on Smith Richardson. It's going to focus at the other end of the Sasko Creek, up north of the Merritt Parkway and our Larson Preserve, where the headwaters of Sasko actually percolate through the groundwaters and the swale and collect into little rivulets and little streams until they eventually come together and flush out in the Long Island Sound at the Sasko Creek. And it's amazing that Audubon has property both at the mouth of that Sasko Creek and then 6 miles inland at the headwaters. And it's important because clearing that way and making sure that the water is fresh and supportive brings in American eel, which is an endangered a fish that we're trying to promote, and bringing in alewife and bringing in the trout brook. Or brook trout rather. This is all linked up. But I just wanted to say one thing about this new and I think pretty creative funding plan called the Neighbor Next Door or Next Door Neighbor Plan. How that works is it's a win-win strategy where the Audubon works with our immediate neighbors who share a property border with Smith. And understandably, neighbors often seek to enhance their own privacy or create some screening from the prying eyes of sanctuary visitors. But honestly, a lot of our sanctuary visitors don't want to look into their backyards or into their pools either. So it really is in both parties' interest to try to create some screening and some privacy. And what happens is we work together to design a screening landscape with native plants selected by the Audubon and arrayed on Audubon property, but the plants and the labor are paid for by the neighbor. And the neighbor gets a full tax deduction as well as the benefit of some screening and also the satisfaction of knowing that they've done good and they've contributed to the restoration cause. And of course, Audubon loves it because it's virtually free money, and it helps to augment what number of trees, what size of tree, what diversity of trees we can plant. We've had 4 of these very successful partnerships with our private landowners, and it's raised over $135,000. So a win-win. And so where do we go from here? And if Jared could grab the mic, he'd tell you, I'm so concerned that, our short-term success, and this really is just short-term, it's just 10 years of working, nature can take over this preserve and push it back to the bad old days in just a matter of a few years. So sustainability is critical for us. And as I said before, you never know what's coming down the pike. This terrible potential scourge, the spotted lanternfly, wasn't even on our radar last year. And now it's showing up in the preserve in other areas of Fairfield County. And we're told that it could be just as bad as the awful gypsy moth infestation of a few years ago. So we will have expenses that we can't even anticipate, but what we can anticipate in terms of the basic maintenance, mowing, and field work, as I said, it's about $25,000 to $30,000. So we're trying to build a perpetuity fund which would be about $500,000, that throws off at 5% that $25,000 to $30,000 to at least keep the place in a generally acceptable stasis. But again, we're about $300,000 today. Over the next couple of years, I'm quite confident we'll get to that 500,000. But this doesn't even include what we could do if we had that extra money. I'll go back to the top. The Christmas tree farm that some of you may know, just up the road on Sasko Creek and part of the Smith-Richardson 75 acres, that's coming off lease in 3 years. And we have great plans for restoration work and replanting up there, but we don't have the money for it. We don't have the budget yet, but we'll get there. Also, those brackish wetlands that I was talking about that feed into the Sasko River, that feed into Southport Beach, we would love to be able to attack that and pull out the Phragmites and clear up some of the water flow. Again, no money right now. It's a complicated area because it's highly regulated, lots of permissioning and certification required, but we'd love to attack that. So I think we're in good shape, but we're very aware that the battle just continues on. And one last shout out here, I mentioned the partnership with Aspetuck Land Trust and Pollinator Pathways. I just got off the phone before this meeting with Patrick Cummings, and he's very excited about particularly some of the waterway projects that we can partner up on the Mill River, the Aspetuck River, and the and Sasko, of course, and bringing the resources of the Aspetuck Land Trust together with the Connecticut Audubon is very, very exciting. Okay, 2 more pages. I just wanted to say, if this inspires you to do a little bit of your own restoration, you'll probably wind up going through a lot of the same questions that we had to answer. You know, what do we have already? What does our site look like? What am I looking for? What am I trying to do? Meadow, woodland, riverside. How much money can I spend? And you have a lot of work and planning to do, even in your own backyard. But it doesn't say that you shouldn't do it. You absolutely should do it. It's so gratifying, and it's a hell of a lot of fun. And if all you do is plant a native, you'll check those 3 boxes, and you'll be rewarded with the diversity of butterflies and birds that'll show up out of nowhere. And it really is, it's not a hollow promise. It truly is, build it and they will come. And so that's kind of the story. I just wanted to do a quick shout out. It's the last page of the invasives management seminar that's going to be held on the 31st. My colleague, Stefan Martin, is going to be a part of that. And I think you'll learn a heck of a lot about how to handle the spotted lanternfly scourge, but also so many of those other invasives, the stilt grass and mugwort and the like. I was asked to lead a Smith walk on Thursday, May 5th. I'd love you to join me. If you can't, jump down to that last bullet point. We have a video, a virtual walk through Smith-Richardson that was recorded some time ago with Jared and myself. So you can actually see the sanctuary 9 minutes in the comfort of your own home. And you can get to that Smith-Richardson video just by clicking onto the Connecticut Audubon or CAS website, a bullet point above. So that is it. And I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Well, thank you so much, Charlie. And I will start by bringing up a few of the questions. You could actually stop sharing your screen if that's a process, or Shana, you could do that for us so we can see you.
I got it.
And terrific. So we have, let's start with some questions. And I anticipate around 15 minutes of questions. So thanks for everybody who is on the call and would like to stay and hear what Charlie has to say here. So what was your strategy in terms of herbicides? Did you cut and paint? What were some of your thoughts on that, Charlie?
That's always a tough one, right? For the woodies, such as euonymus, we did cut and paint. But what you want to do is cut and paint at the right time of year, because the flow of juices in the spring goes up away from the roots and into the leaves to push them out for photosynthesis and collecting the sugar and feeding the roots. that happens in the fall. So the flow back into the roots is a fall phenomenon, and that's when you should be painting the fresh cut, I should say, of a woody, and that goes for bittersweet. That goes for privet or the honeysuckle. All those plants. We don't, when we do use a broader glyphosate or Roundup, as you say, we're very careful. We're in a watershed area. We might have just an intractable collection of mugwort, and we just try to keep it very, very close and make sure that it's not going to be running off. Although they say that this stuff breaks down very quickly, we're just very worried about those pesticides. And there are some very specific broadleaf based sprays, like a garland, where it just goes after the broad invasives, some of those vines that I mentioned before, but it leaves the grasses intact. So you got to be careful. I would rather not use any sprays if avoidable. I know that your earlier presenter, Dark, has said he never uses sprays, but when you're trying to do a restoration on 36 acres, let alone what we're doing up at Larson with 170 acres, sometimes you just have to swallow hard, but be very, very careful.
So as a follow-up to that, Charlie, Matt also asked about the replanting strategy. Where did you decide to replant versus just letting the native seed bank regenerate?
Unfortunately, the seed bank is mostly non-native, and that's the sad truth. So what we would do is, I mean, one of the best starting points is just don't mow a certain part of your property and just see what comes up, because you could be surprised. In fact, we're doing that strategy on 3.5 acres at Oak Lawn Cemetery. But generally speaking, we had to substitute, we had to fill that vacuum. As you know, nature abhors a vacuum, and that bare soil will be repopulated, and maybe not with any of the plants that I mentioned. It could be it could be purslane, it could be chickweed. It's but very seldom, unfortunately, did we find that when we left the cleared land to its own devices, did we get what we really wanted. So it was, get in there, clear it, get your own seeds in there, or get your own plugs in there, and you got to stay on it, because those weeds, those invasives, they're well entrenched. I mean, they've been there for years and years and years, and everybody's property is a little bit different, but certainly in Smith Richardson, what comes back is not the stuff that you want.
Thank you, Charlie. So many questions about the invasives, and thank you for those comments. So a lot of interest in the grant writing and support for the grants.
Oh boy.
One particular question about what support did you receive from the state of Connecticut?
The state of Connecticut, for that particular grant, the National Fish and Wildlife Grant, or Long Island Sound Futures Fund, which is a great organization, but those are federal. And by the way, there's a lot of new money coming into DEEP, or the Department of Environment and Energy Protection, I guess. And so there's going to be a lot of grant money available from Hartford, which is very encouraging. And Patrick is plugged into all those folks, and we're hoping that we can attract some of that money, down this way. And it's you're talking about tens of millions of dollars. But in terms of the grants that we won, the big ones that I highlighted, the one up at Larson and the one at Smith Richardson, those were federal grant dollars. Now there's the one that I put up, that little placard, was actually with DEEP. So that actually was a state sponsored grant. And what they wanted to do was clear, I think it was 12 acres to try to bring back the New England cottontail, which for my money, I can't tell a New England cottontail from an Eastern cottontail. But the New England cottontail is endangered, and you clear out and create these rabitats. That's where that phrase came from. And hopefully they reappear and flourish. So that was a state fund. There's another opportunity up in Goshen, and I'm very excited about this. The state actually bought, I think it was close to 1,000 acres of an old cornfield, and it's in Goshen, where we actually have an 800-acre sanctuary ourselves, and it's next to watershed with a local water authority. And we'd like to seed up 50 acres at a time so that we reseed this whole hillside. It's called Beach Hill. It's absolutely stunning. And Picone, who's the head of DEP and restoration work for the state, is working with Patrick and working with the Audubon, Miley Bull, to try to get some expertise up there, provide money to buy the seed, to pay for the labor required to turn this into a native meadow. And they have done this successfully one town over. And to look at the beauty of a natural field it's just remarkable. So I'm excited about getting involved in that. Now that's not a straight grant, but that's an example of partnership. And there's still a lot of land in Connecticut, believe it or not. 70% is privately owned, and a lot of the old farmers, a lot of the old landowners, they come to us and ask for some ideas of how they can preserve some of it. Although often they need the money, so it's not going to come completely free. And hopefully, with this new money from the state, we can meet them halfway.
Thanks, Charlie. So moving on to some questions about some of the trees, and this comes from Russ. How are all the trees that you've planted? How are they doing? Did any of them die? If so, do you have a hunch of why? Are you seeing any correlation with species, source of trees, time of planting, for instance, spring or fall,
Well,
etc.?
Yeah, it's a great question. Honestly, the best time to plant trees is in the fall. Ironically, that's when the growers are trying to clear out their inventory, because it's expensive to keep trees, particularly when they're balled and burlapped or in a container. You got to keep them wet. You got to keep them from freezing over in some cases. And it's expensive. So the lowest inventory is in the fall, and yet the fall is the absolute best time to plant a tree, because you don't have the heat of the summer, you don't have the lack of moisture. Even if we're not getting snow, you're getting rain. And so if you put it in October, say, you get until the heat of the summer returns in, say, June, you've got 9 months of good establishment. And so, and yet when you go to an Oliver's, I was trying to get a Nyssa sylvatica, right, a tupelo, black gum tree, and they called around to their growers, but they couldn't get one, and I really needed it, and so I'll get it this spring, but I'm afraid I'll put it in April, and we're going to be soaking it with water all through the summer, and that's just extra work that would have been unnecessary if we'd been able to source it in the fall. In terms of so that's the when. In terms of watering, we're very lucky that we've tapped into a neighbor's water source, and we have about half of the property with an irrigation system. And I don't mean sprinklers like lawn sprinklers. I mean big PVC hoses that go to a spigot that we can then screw a hose to, and then do our watering. But we really have to be careful, because summer is a very, very tough time. You're down by the beach, it's very windy. And frankly, a lot of people are out of town. So our volunteer corps, gets a little bit thin in the summertime. In terms of sowing seeds, we can, depending on the seeds, many seeds have to be what they call stratified. So they have to get 60 days of cold. That's milkweed. That's a lot of the natives. So you put them in the late fall and let the nature be your refrigerator, and then they pop up in the spring. Others don't need stratification. So like some of the mints and monarda and bee balm and that sort of thing, you just sow them right in the ground in the spring, and they'll be flowering in a matter of months. So it's a bit of a case by case, but I'd be happy to follow up with you offline if you'd like to talk more.
Thank you so much. Well, we have another question about the fields, the newly created fields. How would they be kept fields? Mowing, burning, perhaps?
We would love to burn, but unfortunately, we can't even take down a deer. So if you're in Westport, forget about getting a permit to set the field on fire. It's funny because Prairie Moon, who is a big source of seed for us, as well as plugs, they say the best thing you can do is just set fire to a field. But they're out in Minnesota, and field burning is as natural as composting and recycling for us in the East here. So burning is a good tactic. No, what we do is we let the fields stand through the winter. And then we cut them in late March. In fact, we're setting up those cuttings now, or early April. And it's fine when you have a stocky field out in Smith Richardson, because the neighbors aren't going to complain. But if you have a neighbor next door who loves that perfect lawn and that edge of dahlias, and you have all your seed pods hanging there for the winter and the stalks all crossing over each other, be ready for a little bit of blowback. But we leave the stalks there because the stalks are overwintering spaces, nesting spaces for so many bugs. If you cut and chop up that stalk, the bug dies. And so we want to be as encouraging as we can to the insect population. And also the seed caps often carry nutritious seed stock well through the winter. I had goldfinch still eating on old thistle tops of thistle, bull thistle, as well as Canada thistle. Even though it's an invasive, it actually is a pretty good seed source. And some of the grasses, the Canadian wild rye, and the broom sedge is a great grass. Deer tongue, those all have seeds that help to nourish through the winter. So we don't do fall cutting, we do the spring cutting. And we do worry about the woodies that come back, the Floribunda rose, and and some of the other bittersweet and such. So we sometimes have to get in there and really cut low. And it's expensive, but it's necessary.
Charlie, so people were noting how to get rid of some of the bittersweet seedlings and the resprouting of the bittersweet, and also the mugwort. Some people were saying, hey, we're pulling it out, but it just continues to spread.
Well, the mugwort,
talk to us about that.
If it's a small gene, if it's for the bittersweet, you cut it down to, bittersweet is an amazing vine. If you see an old bittersweet vine, so the oldest we got was a 35-year-old vine, and it wraps around itself in the most beautiful sort of accordion. It's an amazing plant. But you have to cut it down to the ground and paint it. That's really the only way to get rid of it. And it's bittersweet because the root is so orange and almost oozes orange when you cut it. So you really have to just topically get a buckthorn buster or even glyphosate and just paint it, and you're going to be okay. Wear gloves, but that's the way to get rid of that. Mugwort is tougher because it spreads not only with its rhizomes underground, and it makes an incredible impenetrable mat, but it also has a very flowing seed head. And so that spreads the seeds all over the place. So what we do is we try to cut so that the seed head propagation at least is truncated. And we do get in there and do a little bit of tilling and some extraction of the roots, but it's tough because a little root is going to create a new mugwort plant. So that's where I say quickly replace and replant that area where you took the mugwort out. And don't try to do it all at once because it's backbreaking, but just start with some space and then continue to push, and hopefully you'll have some success that way.
Thank you so much. A question, I know I've heard you talk about this, Charlie, about establishing a permanent fenced-in deer enclosure around portions of the sanctuary. Would you speak to that? Had you considered that? I think that's something that you're doing right now, isn't it?
Yeah, in part of my presentation, I said I get asked all the time, when can we take down the enclosure? Because it really, people want to walk among those beautiful plants and feel the trees and the bark and maybe pick a couple of persimmon, who cares? But unfortunately, the deer are, the largest count of the deer we had were 38 in a herd a year and a half ago. So they come through, they're hungry. They're dodging the cars on I-95. They're dodging the train. Metro North goes right by the edge of the sanctuary. And they're dodging coyotes. We've got a lot of coyotes out there. We're now seeing bobcat, which is pretty cool. Bobcat aren't going to be eating the deer, but the coyotes certainly do. So these deer, it's not a great life. But man, when they can get a free meal, particularly in the wintertime, they will knock down fences. They will pull up the netting. And so we have to be ever diligent. And unfortunately, having the fencing is just something that we have to live with. I'm actually thinking about more stable, permanent metal fencing as opposed to the nylon fencing, which the deer somehow they're able to chew through in some instances, not very often, in that they only need a little hole and they can slide right in there. We've even seen them do the limbo rock and go underneath the edge of the fence to get in there. They're motivated because it's a matter of life and death for them, and this is their food source. And in fairness, we've cut off some of their natural grazing areas by fencing in. I said miles of fencing. One roll is 330 feet, and we've probably bought, 150 rolls. I mean, do the math, but it's a lot of work, and it is unending. I wish we didn't have to do it, but. And by the way, and that's particular to Fairfield and in this area. If you're up in Vermont, say, the deer challenge is not nearly as bad. Where you are in Chatham, Gene, I don't know if the deer population is as bad, but certainly down here, it's bad, and it's not good for the deer either, because you see them starving themselves because there just isn't enough food to go around, enough land for them to live on.
Well, Charlie, it was really interesting because shout out to Russ Cohen on the line. He was talking about some examples of where people had actually outfitted this fenced-in area with gates, so the public can get in. And he was talking about the Cornell Botanical Gardens in New York, the Norcross Wild Sanctuary in Wales, Massachusetts, and others. So thanks so much, Russ, for piping in with that. So another question from Emily here. How did you get buy-in from the neighbors, Charlie? Get them involved and supportive of this big project?
Wow, that's a great question, because this, for years, Gene, nobody visited this site. So it was their own little private preserve. I mean, it was a mess, but they didn't have birders coming in with bazooka cameras and, folks walking in. And we actually allow dogs on leash in there. It's the only sanctuary in Connecticut Audubon's portfolio where we do allow dogs. But as with Aspetuck Land Trust, we tried to meet so many constituents halfway, because we needed friends, we needed contributions, and so we used to actually allow them to go off leash. At least we pulled it back one notch to on leash. But so the neighbors, they have had this space for many years, but it took a completely different turn when we cleaned it up, and suddenly people discovered it. Gene, particularly during COVID, for 2 years, I would run into them and they'd say, "This place is my haven. It keeps me sane. Thank you so much." I mean, it was wonderful and so gratifying. But the neighbors have been great. I mean, Jared O'Connell is the one who started this whole movement, and he was really our neighborhood docent, if you will. If there were any issues, he would go over and talk directly to the neighbor and work it out. We also simplified the access. There was not a formal parking area, Gene, before. When that first, I mentioned the LeConte sparrow. A couple of years ago, we had an even rarer bird called a Cassin's vireo, and we had like 40 different cars, and they were parked right up to the edge of the sanctuary and almost on the neighbor's property, and that was unacceptable. So we put in a split rail fence, poured some trap rock, and so the maximum number of cars you can get in that parking lot now is about 12. So we've really tried to work with the neighbors to be sensitive to them. One of the neighbors has a wide open backyard where people were allowing their dog to walk onto their property, or even the individuals were walking onto the property. And so we worked with him to put in a screen. This is part of that Good Neighbor program that I mentioned before. We put in beautiful holly and viburnum and some grade birch trees, and it's a spectacular screen. And we made a friend out of what could have been a foe. So we try to meet them halfway, and I think the neighbors I think they feel damn lucky that they have a place like this where they themselves can go and snowshoe when it snows, walk the dog if they have a puppy, or just go out and commune.
Oh, Charlie, thank you so much for that. Just remarkable all the way around. So we have a few questions about, you had mentioned at one point weekly mowing. And so people were curious, weekly mowing of what? Were there lawns that you were talking about at
Well,
one point?
we have paths. So if you went back to the signs, at the bottom of each sign is a map of the paths, and we keep all the paths open. A lot of people, as you know, Gene, worry about ticks, and we certainly have ticks at Smith Richardson. Ticks are also a great food for the birds, so that's all part of the deal. But we are mowing those trails about every other week. We have a big bush hog that does the job, and then in addition to that mowing, we attack the invasive spots, like I mentioned before, mugwort, garlic mustard, whatever. We're not mowing it necessarily to eradicate it, but we're mowing it to weaken it so that it doesn't go into flower and it doesn't spread that way. So there's two levels of mowing. One is just the basic maintenance of the paths, and the other is part of our invasive management strategy.
So you mentioned the garlic mustard. Someone's saying, Linda's saying, wow, we have so much in my backyard. How do we get rid of it without herbicides?
It's actually not the hardest one to get rid of. It's a biennial, which means that it lasts 2 years, and it relies on its second year seed production to propagate, to continue. What happens is you just have the leaves in year one, and then in year two, you have those white flowers on top that look a little bit like cress or what's the other one I'm trying to think of? Chickweed. But if you keep cutting, then the flowers don't get pollinated, and it won't spread, and you'll find that the crop dies out in a couple of years. The problem is a lot of people have garlic mustard in the woods and going around and cutting in between all the trees and over the wet leaves and all that. It can be a real pain. So maybe you're better off with a weed whacker if you want to attack it that way. But garlic mustard also, it dies back very quickly. So even though it's a scourge in the spring, come June, you're not going to have any garlic mustard. Then you're going to be worrying about stilt grass and mugwort. So at least it comes and goes. So it's not my worst. The other thing I'll say, if you're so adventuresome, my son is a forager, loves mushrooms first, but also loves spring greens, and he says garlic mustard as well as stinging nettle are two of the best salad fixings you're going to find. Happy to forward his recipes if you'd like.
Oh, thanks, Charlie. Well, people are getting excited here, and one homeowner wants to plant some oak trees. What size do you recommend that they buy with a small budget? What would be a good local resource? And they're going to be planting with their spouse, so probably the bare roots are big and maybe a little bit too slow for them. What do you recommend?
Well, I mean, it depends where you start with a vision of what the property is. I mean, you're not going to put it near your front door because if you're putting in a white oak by your front door, you're going to wind up having to cut it down. You got to give oaks, because they are big trees, plenty of space to grow. If it's a wet area, bur oak is a great choice. Chinkapin loves wet. Swamp white oak loves it. If it's a dry area, maybe a chestnut oak is a good choice, or a straight white oak. Red and black oak are also good choices. So it really depends, and I'd be happy to follow up. If you're local, I'll come by and just have a little look-see. Contact Gene or Mel, and I'd be happy to do that. I do this kind of thing all the time. But I wouldn't go too small. There's plenty of oaks out there for not a lot of money. Give yourself a head start, but also know that you have to protect it against the deer, because deer will, they're not going to attack a 300-year-old white oak, but they will eat the top off, eat the crown off of your oak tree. And if it's not above their browse line 6 feet, which doesn't sound like you're going to put in a tree quite that size, although those aren't expensive, you do have to protect it, because the deer have taste buds for those oaks. So I don't know if I answered your question, but you have to do a little bit of reconnaissance and research to decide on the right oak. But oak is definitely the way to go. Talamay would applaud your decision. Now it's just where, what size, and how many.
And of course, Charlie, we both know the Aspetuck Land Trust native plant sales coming up, and Mel, I know will talk to us a little bit about that at the end of this call, if not going forward. So we have a couple of questions, and you had mentioned helping out. Ted had a question about the town of Fairfield. How can the town of Fairfield leverage your expertise in creating Friends of Lake Mohegan, Hoytons Hill, to put an ongoing management plan and volunteers in place? The pollinator pathway in Fairfield is working on this.
Yeah, I would defer to Mary Hogue, who is running the pollinator pathway there. You know her very well.
And actually, she's on the call with us, Charlie, today.
Yeah.
So here you go, Mary.
Go ahead, there's your layup, Mary.
That's great. Another question.
I thought she was going to speak. The Hoytons Hill property is fascinating because there's actually, I've talked about all habitat. The Tucker Fund actually endowed a restoration and native plantings in that property right behind the driving range at, lo and behold, Smith Richardson golf course. But they found, and this is David Roach, one of the most accomplished meadow pollinators. It was his equipment with all habitat that we showed in the sowing picture. He's had a hell of a time getting control of the mugwort, and he's in his 4th season of trying to knock that stuff back. Now this is about 3 acres, so it's big, but he knows that if we don't get on control of the mugwort, it's going to take over and it's going to ruin all the seeds that he'll painstakingly plant. So that's not easy. So I love Hoytons Hill. It's a great area, and I've only heard about some of the plans for the for Lake Mohegan. But that already has some beautiful meadows, particularly under the high tension wires where you have to have a cut. And those cuts are wonderful spaces for birds because it's that sort of edge habitat. And that's one of my favorite places to go birding. So I'm excited that they're taking that area seriously and going to do some planting.
Fantastic. Well, Charlie, there was a question here about, you mentioned planting sorghum and millet on the land seed for birds and the Southport onion, an heirloom crop. None of these plants are native plants, as you know. How do you decide where to plant some of these non-natives, and the difference between where you felt natives would actually strictly stay on the property?
Bingo, you caught me on that one. I actually put this to Stefan and Miley, and I said, these are African grasses. Why are we putting sorghum and millet out there as African grasses? And sometimes you've got to be a little bit flexible and adaptive because these grasses have very high fat content, very high antioxidant content. Honestly, the best berry out there is poison ivy berry. We never cut the poison ivy off the trees because it's just the #1 energy drink for birds. But you're not going to be planting poison ivy all over the place. But so you get a little bit caught on some of these questions. But on that one, look, it's 36 acres. We only take an acre and a half and dedicate it to these grasses. And if it were my choice, I would make it all native. But to be honest with you, sorghum and millet is cheap. It grows very fast. It's deer resistant, which most of the grasses are, not all. And I think it's quite attractive. And we used to have 3 of these plots. We've actually, because of cost, let the other 2 plots just go to native grasses and goldenrod. We're very lucky. The white snakeroot that I mentioned has propagated very nicely in those other 2 areas with a little help from us transplanting and a little bit of help on some of the goldenrod, the rough leafed and the zigzag goldenrod. so we try to give it a hand. But you're absolutely right. We're going non-native. There are some reasons for going non-native, but it's not perfect. And we try not to be doctrinaire. I mean, we don't have a problem with you're putting in a star magnolia, if you'd like. It's a beautiful early plant and provides helpful early spring pollen, but its leaves will never be eaten, so it doesn't check that second box. But it also throws out nice berry and fruit at the end of the year, so it's not horrible. And I could use other examples as well. The butterfly bush, which everybody says, oh my God, I have to put in butterfly bushes to attract butterflies. Well, the butterflies will come for the nectar, but they can't eat those leaves, and their caterpillars can't eat those leaves. So they have to find some other host plant to lay their eggs. And the butterfly bush is not a host plant. But man, isn't it wonderful to see swallowtails and monarchs, fluttering around, 10, 12 at a time on a good, healthy August butterfly bush.
Well, thank you. We have a couple of questions about what you're doing with invasives when you cut them down. Do you leave them on the site? Some people have been removing all parts of the plant. Some people have, they worry that if they cut the plants, it'll fruit seed spread by rhizome. What can they get away with versus moving them off site? And I think a couple of questions around this about the treatment of some of the things you're cutting down.
It's a great one. What we do, for the trees that I mentioned, as long as they're not infected, we just pile them on. The sticks and the woodies we pile on. But in terms of the mildemint, the mugwort, the garlic mustard and all that, we throw it in the back of a truck and take it down to the dump. We try to get it off the site. It's a little bit more expensive, but it's necessary because those seeds, amazingly, these weeds, they can continue to expand and grow, particularly when you're piling them one on top of the other. You're actually creating another medium for them to almost, air propagation, if you will. So we try to get them onto Adrian's truck or onto Oswaldo's truck and take it down to the dump and get rid of it. It's a little extra work, obviously, because you have to, gather it all up. It'd be easier just to leave it there, but that's what we do.
Okay, thank you so much. So a lot of interest with kids, students getting involved with projects like that. You mentioned the GFA students coming into SRWP, and what about the public schools in the area?
Well, maybe I didn't make it clear. The public schools have been great sources for us. The Slobs are the staple league of boys, and that's the Westport Public School. The Builders Beyond Borders, that NGO that I mentioned before, those are all high school kids who have to give have to give community time back in order to earn the right to fly out to foreign countries to help with community projects in those foreign countries. We have a lot of support from the school groups, GFA and Staples. Some of the Long Lots kids have banded together. Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts. There's a group called the National Conference of Ladies, where the mother and daughters get together and they help us. They're particularly helpful on the weeding front and watering. We get great support from the schools, and I'm sorry if I didn't make that clearer, but it's a vital source for us. And then through the kids, you reach the parents, and then you never know what connection the parents have working for a JP Morgan or Dugal or Webster Bank or whatever it happens to be, and all of a sudden one route leads to another, and you have a community. So involving the kids is very, very important.
Charlie, this has been a remarkable program, and we've rounded out the questions here. So I'm at this point going to turn this over to Mel and to wrap us up, and want to thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
That was wonderful, Charlie. What a great presentation. We've gotten rave reviews in in the chat and the Q&A. So that was just wonderful. So I wanted to make sure everybody is invited to our next Lunch and Learn, which is also has some experts from Connecticut Audubon. So Stefan will be talking about invasive removal along with a panel of other experts, and that is next week on Thursday, the 31st of March, on invasive removals. So we'll have Lou Bakioki from the Aspetuck Land Trust, Mo Green, Dan Delventhal, and also Emmett from the Connecticut Invasive Plant Working Group. So it's going to be a whole panel of experts talking about invasives. And I know that was a lot of questions that came today for Charlie about the invasive management. So thank you for your questions. I also forgot to thank our fabulous Jean Stets-Pachowski, who is the host for our Zooms, our Lunch and Learns. Jean is the principal of Individual Differences at Work, which is a leadership and coaching company. And she cultivates leaders who grow organizations, and is a longtime member of the Aspetuck Land Trust, and is a farmer in Easton. And of course, thank you to Shana Meyer, our Aspetuck Data and Marketing Manager, who is behind the scenes. There she is, managing all things data.
I stopped the recording accidentally. Sorry.
Oh, you did?
That was me.
That was you who did that?
Yes, accident. So sorry.
That's okay. Her cat probably walked across the board, but that's
I thought
okay.
I was getting a hook there.
So Shana will be sending out an announcement about our next Lunch and Learn probably this evening. So everybody, can jump on and register for that one. And I'm just so thrilled with the response and the participation in these Lunch and Learns. People learn so much, and it's really inspiring. And I'm just so thankful for everybody who's a member of the Aspetuck Land Trust and a member of Connecticut Audubon. And if you're not, jump on and help our two organizations to continue to improve and increase biodiversity in our landscape. So our plant sale, our native plant sale, which everyone's asking about, should open online if Shane and I can get it going by April 1st. And pickup for the plants will be June 10th. So we pushed it later this year because a lot of the ecotype perennials were just not quite waking up in May. So we're going to give them an extra month and get them out to you for June planting, where they'll be a little bit more robust for you. But April 1st, we're hoping to get online with our native plant sale. It's been super popular, and we're so thankful and grateful to all of you for buying these plants and getting them into your backyards. Because as Charlie showed us today, when you plant it, they will come, whether it's the birds or the bees or all the insects that are needed by everyone. You have to get these natives into the landscape, and magically they show up. So thanks everybody for having lunch with us today. And feel free to reach out to me or to Charlie if we have any further questions. But enjoy the rest of this beautiful day, and happy spring, everybody. Thanks. Take care. Bye-bye.